one arrogant millionaire, one humble waitress, and a grand piano that would change everything. What began as a cruel attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced the entire restaurant and exposed his ego in front of everyone. But here's the twist: she didn't fight back with anger or with words, she fought back with something far more powerful. This is the story of how a quiet young woman, underestimated by everyone in the room, stunned them all with a hidden gift they never saw coming. It was a warm Friday night in Raleigh, North Carolina. The kind of night when the city feels alive, couples laughing over candlelit dinners, the clink of wine glasses echoing through a crowded dining room, and soft jazz notes floating from a corner piano. La Fontaine wasn't just a restaurant. It was the place. Polished wood floors, crystal chandeliers, and an atmosphere that whispered luxury with every detail. The kind of place where power and wealth sat down to feast. And in the middle of it all was Deborah. Just 25, dressed in a crisp black and white uniform, weaving between tables with plates balanced on her hands and a smile that hid the exhaustion behind her eyes. To most guests, she was just another waitress, forgettable, replaceable. But what they didn't see was the spark in her gaze. Deborah wasn't born to serve tables. Her true love, her true world, lived in music. Ever since she was a little girl, the piano had been her safe place, her escape, her way of telling stories without saying a word. Now, as she moved quietly between wealthy diners, the grand piano sitting untouched in the corner seemed to call to her like an old friend. Few people knew it, but that piano was the reason she had taken this job in the first place. And on this night, that piano wouldn't just be background decoration. It was about to become the center of a moment that no one in La Fontaine would ever forget. The front doors of La Fontaine swung open with a sharp pull, and in walked Leonard Grayson. If wealth had a face, it might have been his. Tall, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, with that smug confidence that said he owned not just his business empire, but every room he stepped into. People didn't just notice Leonard, they felt him. His presence carried weight, and his reputation carried even more. Known across Raleigh as a ruthless entrepreneur, Leonard had money, influence, and a love for spectacle. He wasn't just rich, he was the kind of man who enjoyed reminding everyone else that they weren't. His sharp tongue could cut deeper than a knife, and he thrived on putting others in their place. He didn't walk in quietly, either. With a small entourage of equally polished companions trailing behind him, Leonard strolled to his table like the restaurant was his stage. Staff straightened their backs. Diners glanced up. Even the low hum of conversation dipped for a moment before resuming. And then, his eyes landed on Deborah. She was just refilling water glasses, moving as calmly as she could through the crowded floor. But to Leonard, she wasn't just another waitress. She was tonight's amusement. His lips curled into a smirk, the kind that carried trouble. Deborah felt the weight of his stare but shook it off. She had a job to do, and arrogant customers were nothing new. What she didn't know was that Leonard had already chosen her for something far more than serving drinks. He was about to turn her into his next game. Before that night at La Fontaine, Deborah's story had already been written in sacrifice. She grew up in a small town in South Carolina, in a modest home that always seemed just a step behind on bills. Her mother, strong, tireless, and endlessly loving, worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep food on the table for Deborah and her siblings. Life wasn't easy, but music made it bearable. When she was only 7, a neighbor gave their family an old, out-of-tune upright piano. Most kids might have seen it as nothing more than a piece of furniture. But to Deborah, it was magic. She'd spend hours pressing its worn keys, teaching herself melodies by ear. Pop songs from the radio at first, then hymns from church, and eventually even classical pieces she discovered in second-hand books. The piano became her escape. When other kids ran around outside, Deborah poured her heart into those keys. Every note was a piece of her joy, her pain, her hope. Her talent didn't go unnoticed. She played at school recitals, community events, even church gatherings. Each time, people told her she had something rare, something that couldn't be taught. But talent alone wasn't enough. By the time she turned 18, reality hit hard. Scholarships she applied for didn't come through, and her family needed her help more than ever. Dreams of conservatories and music academies had to be boxed up and pushed aside. Bills came first. Responsibility came first. So Deborah worked. She took whatever job she could to survive. But even as the years passed, one truth never changed: she couldn't let go of the piano. It wasn't just her dream, it was her identity. When she moved to Raleigh and found La Fontaine, it wasn't just about the paycheck. The restaurant had a grand piano in the corner, gleaming under the lights. And even though she rarely touched it, just knowing it was there kept a piece of her alive. What she didn't know was that very piano would soon become the weapon that changed everything. Leonard leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine in his hand as if he owned time itself. His table laughed loudly at every half-witty remark he made, the kind of forced laughter rich men buy with money and power. But then, he suddenly grew quiet. His eyes flicked toward the piano in the corner, the one Deborah secretly adored. A sly grin curved across his lips. "Tell me," he said, loud enough for his companions to hear, "does anyone around here even know how to play that thing? Or is it just decoration for the poor?" The table chuckled, following his lead. Deborah, walking past with a tray of empty glasses, froze for half a second. She felt the sting of his words even though they weren't aimed directly at her. Leonard noticed. And that was all it took. "You," he called out, pointing at her like she was an object, not a person. "Waitress. You look like you've got nimble fingers. Why don't you give us a song?" The room went still. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Deborah blinked, caught between disbelief and humiliation. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, forcing professionalism into her voice. "That's not part of my job." "Oh, come now," Leonard pressed, his tone dripping with mockery. "Don't be shy. What's the worst that could happen? Afraid you'll embarrass yourself?" The laughter at his table grew louder. Deborah's cheeks burned. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but Leonard wasn't done. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with challenge. "Tell you what," he said, his voice slicing through the air. "Play something for us. Just one song. If you're good, I'll leave $100 tip. If not," he smirked, pausing just long enough for the cruelty to sink in. "Well, then everyone here will know you wasted your life dreaming about music you'll never master." The weight of his words crushed the air around her. It wasn't just a dare. It was a public execution disguised as entertainment. Deborah's heart raced. Every nerve screamed to walk away. But deep inside, another voice, quiet but fierce, whispered that this moment wasn't just humiliation. It was a test. The piano waited. Silent. Patient. And all eyes were on her. Deborah's hands trembled as she set her tray down. For a moment, she thought of walking straight into the kitchen and never looking back. But then she saw Leonard's smug grin, the way his companions leaned forward, waiting to watch her crumble. Something inside her snapped. Not in fear, but in defiance. She took a slow, steady breath and walked toward the piano. Each step echoed in the silence of the restaurant. Conversation stopped. Even the clinking of glasses faded. By the time she sat down on the polished bench, you could hear the sound of her heartbeat in the hush. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For one terrifying second, her mind went blank. Then, almost instinctively, she pressed down, and a soft, haunting melody spilled into the air. The first notes were gentle, delicate, like whispers floating above candlelight. But soon, her playing grew bolder. The keys came alive under her touch, weaving a tapestry of sound that filled every corner of La Fontaine. The diners froze, forks suspended, eyes wide. Conversations died completely as the music wrapped around them. Deborah wasn't just playing, she was speaking. Every fear, every hope, every sleepless night of doubt poured into that song. Her hands moved faster now, blurring with passion. The melody swelled, rising and falling like waves crashing against a shore. For the first time that night, Leonard's grin faltered. He leaned back, eyes narrowing as if he couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. By the time she struck the final chord, the room was breathless. Then came the sound. Not of laughter. Not of mockery. Applause. Thunderous, uncontrollable applause. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. Strangers who moments ago hadn't even looked at her were now staring with awe, as if they'd just discovered a hidden star. Deborah sat frozen, hands still resting on the keys, her chest rising and falling with the weight of everything she'd just poured out. For once, she didn't feel like a waitress. She felt like who she truly was, a musician. And across the room, Leonard's glass of wine sat untouched, his smug expression erased, replaced with something else entirely. A silence fell again, not of doubt this time, but of anticipation. Everyone was waiting. Waiting to see what he would do next. For a moment, Leonard said nothing. His table looked at him nervously, as if waiting for their leader's cue on how to react. His smug arrogance, the shield he always wore, was cracked. Finally, he placed his wine glass down with a deliberate clink. He leaned forward, studying Deborah like she was some puzzle he hadn't planned on solving. "Well," he said slowly, voice quieter now. "That was unexpected." The room held its breath. Was this another cruel setup? Another punchline waiting to sting? But instead of mocking, Leonard began to clap. Slow, measured, deliberate. The sound cut through the silence until others joined, unsure but eager to keep the energy alive. Within seconds, the applause roared again, louder than before. Yet, there was something about Leonard's clap. It wasn't admiration. It was ownership. He smirked, calling across the room, "Looks like our little waitress has been hiding some real talent." His words dripped with the same arrogance, but the undertone was different now. Interest. Curiosity. Calculation. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp bill, and waved it lazily. $100, just like I promised. He tossed it onto the piano as if he were throwing scraps to a stray dog. Deborah's stomach twisted. The applause that had filled her with pride suddenly felt tainted, cheapened by his gesture. She didn't touch the money. Instead, she stood, her chin lifted, her pride intact. She had played for herself, for her own dignity, not for his approval. But Leonard wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "Tell me, Deborah," he called, her name rolling off his tongue like he had just discovered it for the first time, "is that all you've got? Or do you have more hidden surprises?" The room shifted again, the crowd sensing the tension rising once more. Deborah met his gaze, her heartbeat steady now. She wasn't the same trembling waitress he had mocked minutes ago. And Leonard knew it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Deborah didn't flinch. She didn't glance at the $100 bill still sitting on the piano, as though it were nothing more than a napkin tossed aside. Instead, she stepped forward, the glow of the chandelier catching in her eyes like sparks ready to ignite. "For you," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the silent room, "it might just be entertainment. A game. But for me, this is life. It's the only thing that's ever made sense." The words cut sharper than any melody could. Leonard's smirk wavered. For the first time all night, someone wasn't playing by his rules. His table shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands, unsure whether to laugh, clap, or disappear. Deborah didn't give him the chance to twist her moment into mockery again. "You wanted me to embarrass myself," she continued, her tone steady, fierce. "But instead, I reminded myself who I really am. Not a servant for your amusement. Not a shadow in this restaurant. A musician." The audience murmured, some nodding, others clapping softly in support. The tide was turning. Leonard's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to losing, especially not to someone he saw as beneath him. But the more he stared at Deborah, the more it became clear, he wasn't in control anymore. She was. For a heartbeat, the two locked eyes, wealth and arrogance against raw, unshakable passion. Then Deborah stepped away from the piano, leaving the bill untouched. She walked past Leonard's table without a glance, her dignity intact, her spirit untouchable. The diners parted for her like waves breaking for a ship. Some reached out to pat her arm, others whispered encouragement, but Deborah didn't slow down. She didn't need applause anymore. She had won something far greater. And Leonard? He sat frozen, watching her disappear into the kitchen. His grin was gone. In its place lingered a look few had ever seen on his face before, respect, twisted with the sting of defeat. This wasn't the ending he had planned. But it was the one everyone would remember. The applause faded, the clinking of glasses returned, and the restaurant's hum slowly picked back up. But nothing inside La Fontaine felt the same. People still whispered about what they had witnessed, replaying the image of a young waitress turning silence into music that shook the walls of wealth and arrogance. In the kitchen, Deborah leaned against the counter, her chest rising and falling, her hands still tingling from the keys. She wasn't thinking about the money she refused. She wasn't thinking about Leonard's smug face or the stares of the diners. She was thinking about one thing: she had proved to herself that her gift was real and undeniable. That night, she wasn't just a waitress. She was an artist who had commanded a room full of strangers and silenced a man who thought he owned the world. And the story didn't end at La Fontaine. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread beyond those walls. People who had been there that night retold the story, their voices alive with awe. Some claimed it was the most moving performance they had ever heard. Others insisted they'd never forget the way she stood tall against Leonard's cruelty. As for Leonard, his reputation never quite recovered. To many, he was still the millionaire with power and influence. But to those who sat in La Fontaine that night, he was the man who lost to a waitress with nothing but a piano and unshakable courage. Deborah's journey was only beginning. That single moment, born of humiliation, turned into triumph, became the spark that lit everything else. She realized she didn't need permission to pursue her music. She didn't need approval from the wealthy or applause from strangers. What she needed was exactly what she had that night: courage to step forward, sit at the piano, and let the world hear her truth. Because sometimes, the most powerful legacies don't come from the richest men in the room. They come from the voices no one expected to rise. That night at La Fontaine wasn't just about a song. It was about courage, dignity, and the power of refusing to let someone else write your story. Deborah walked into that restaurant as a waitress. She walked out as something far greater, a woman who discovered her strength in front of the very people who once overlooked her. And Leonard? For all his wealth and arrogance, he learned a lesson money could never buy: real power isn't in control, or in mocking those beneath you. Real power lies in the human spirit, the kind that can turn humiliation into triumph, and silence into music that lives forever. Deborah's story reminds us of something simple, but unforgettable: sometimes the biggest stage of your life appears when you least expect it. And in that moment, you either walk away, or you rise. She chose to rise.